I'm here with Prince Harry. Prince Harry. Harry.
I actually said you can call me whatever you want.
Okay.
The decision has been a surprise.
The laughter had not even begun when Meghan's team received the first warning. Two of comedy's most fearless voices were preparing new material. Royal insiders were suddenly paying attention. And one private message suggested that the coming jokes would expose far more than an awkward celebrity moment. The rumors had started quietly, moving through private conversations in entertainment circles before reaching those closest to Meghan and Harry. Chris Rock was said to be developing sharp material about grievance, fame, and the strange power of claiming to be unheard while commanding global attention. Jimmy Carr, meanwhile, was reportedly circling a different target: royal titles, personal branding, privilege, and the uncomfortable question of whether independence could still be marketed through a connection to the monarchy. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel for more hidden royal stories, palace secrets, and dramatic moments the monarchy would rather keep behind closed doors. Neither comedian had built a career by stepping away from dangerous subjects. That was what made the warning feel different. This was not expected to be a passing reference buried inside a longer performance. The message reaching Meghan's representatives suggested something broader, colder, and far more deliberate. A comedy segment designed to pull apart the public identity she had spent years building after leaving royal life. For Meghan, the threat was not simply embarrassment. It was reduction. Interviews, speeches, projects, accusations, hopes, and years of carefully chosen language could suddenly be compressed into a handful of devastating punchlines. Comedy did not need to prove every claim. It only needed to make one contradiction feel obvious enough for an audience to remember. Harry initially tried to dismiss the danger. Public attention moved quickly, he argued. One routine would be replaced by another controversy within days. But Meghan understood what he did not. Formal criticism could be challenged. Headlines could be denied. A joke, once repeated, could travel without context and settle into the public imagination as if it had always been true. Inside the palace, there was no official reaction. Yet the silence did not mean indifference. Royal aides were reportedly watching closely, wondering whether the material would remain focused on public contradictions or move toward private family disputes. Some feared another wave of damaging attention. Others may have recognized an opportunity the monarchy could never openly create. Outsiders saying what palace figures themselves were forbidden to say. That left Meghan facing a question more dangerous than any insult. What happens when a woman who fought for control of her own story becomes the subject of performers whose power comes from destroying control? The answer was already taking shape. Rock would challenge grievance. Carr would attack status and branding. Then, an early rehearsal line reportedly reached Meghan's circle. No one laughed. No one spoke. Its wording was brief, but everyone understood the damage it could do. But the first leaked line was only a warning, because behind the comedy was a deeper weakness. Meghan had spent years trying to hide the growing gap between the image she promoted and the story the public believed. Meghan had survived palace accusations, tabloid storms, family fractures, and years of public suspicion. Yet comedians posed a different threat. They did not need documents, witnesses, or royal approval. They needed only one contradiction, one perfectly timed pause, and an audience ready to laugh at what had once seemed untouchable. After stepping away from royal duty, Meghan did not disappear. She rebuilt herself in public. She became an independent media figure, a humanitarian voice, a producer, an entrepreneur, and a celebrity no longer bound by palace rules. Each new role was presented as proof that she had escaped an institution that had restricted her. But every reinvention also created another promise she had to fulfill, and another weakness critics could examine. Projects arrived with the language of fresh beginnings. New partnerships were described as turning points. Public appearances promised purpose, freedom, and control. Yet the reaction was often divided. Supporters saw courage and survival. Critics saw a woman repeatedly announcing that she had moved forward while remaining closely connected to the royal story she claimed to have left behind. That contradiction was dangerous because comedy could make it brutally simple. Meghan had spoken about privacy while continuing to occupy one of the world's most visible platforms. She had condemned the pressure of royal attention while building projects around the fascination created by her royal experience. The truth behind those choices might be complicated, emotional, and deeply personal. A comedian did not need the full truth. A comedian needed only a pattern the audience already recognized. Inside Meghan's circle, the debate became tense. Some advisors believed any response would give the routines greater importance. Others warned that silence could allow two performers to define her entire journey without resistance. Meghan understood both dangers. To answer could make her appear wounded. To remain quiet could make the laughter feel deserved. Harry's discomfort ran even deeper. Mockery aimed at Meghan rarely stopped with Meghan. It became a judgment on his loyalty, his separation from his family, and the future he had chosen. Every joke about her independence threatened to become a joke about his sacrifice. The palace held the strongest position of all. It needed to say nothing. Official silence protected the monarchy, while comedians delivered criticisms no royal aide could safely express. Jimmy Carr could target titles, luxury, privilege, and rejection. Chris Rock could attack grievance, selective outrage, and the difficulty of appearing powerless while holding enormous influence. There was no public evidence of coordination between them. That almost made the danger worse. Two separate routines could appear within days, creating not one embarrassing moment, but a sustained cultural wave. When Meghan's team learned how close the performances might be, the problem changed completely. This was no longer about surviving a single punchline. It was about whether the first laugh would prepare the audience for the next. And as Meghan's advisors searched for a response, Harry faced a more personal fear. The laughter might not simply target his wife, it might expose how completely their shared future had become tied to the monarchy they left behind. Harry had defended Meghan against newspapers, commentators, relatives, institutions, and strangers. But comedy offered him no clear enemy to confront. Any protest could become another punchline. Any silence could look like surrender. For the first time, loyalty itself seemed capable of making the humiliation worse. He understood the pattern too well. Each time he challenged a headline, another appeared. Every denial created fresh debate. Every attempt to protect Meghan seemed to invite more analysis of her words, his choices, and the family they had left behind. Now, advisors were warning him that comedians were even more dangerous to confront. Public criticism would not silence performers whose reputations depended on refusing pressure. It might encourage them. Harry's anger was immediate. He believed the routines were turning years of pain into entertainment, stripping away everything complicated until Meghan became nothing more than a symbol for an audience to judge. To him, this was not harmless satire. It was another moment in which people discussed his wife as an idea rather than treating her as a person. Meghan's reaction was colder, but no less intense. She was furious at the suggestion that she should simply endure ridicule after spending years being expected to remain quiet. Yet she also saw the trap Harry was walking toward. A public attack on the comedians could make the story larger, damage future partnerships, and turn one performance into an international argument. That difference created a private fracture. Harry wanted to confront the cruelty directly. Meghan wanted to know why the material had surfaced now, who had encouraged it, and whether anyone connected to the palace was quietly enjoying the result. She did not need to believe the monarchy had arranged anything. Comedy offered royal insiders something more useful than involvement: distance, silence, and complete deniability. For Harry, that possibility cut deeply. He imagined relatives interpreting every laugh as proof that leaving had not liberated him. In their eyes, the jokes could become evidence that he had surrendered royal protection only to expose himself and Meghan to a harsher world. Friends urged him not to watch. They told him that hearing every word would only make the anger harder to control. Harry refused. If Meghan was going to be discussed publicly, he wanted to know exactly what had been said. Then another rumor arrived. One of the comedians might not stop with Meghan. Harry himself could become the punchline. The prince who left the institution but could not escape its story. Attention turned toward an entertainment event where Chris Rock was expected to test new material before an audience that rewarded brutal honesty. Hours before it began, Harry received a short transcript. It contained only the setup, an unfinished line about royal victimhood and global influence. Meghan read it once. Then again. She did not need to see the ending. She already understood where the joke was going. The unfinished joke left them with hours to imagine the ending. But Chris Rock was already preparing to deliver something more dangerous than an insult. A version of Meghan's story that made the audience question who truly held the power. When Chris Rock finally mentioned Meghan, the room changed before he reached the punchline. The audience sensed that this was not a harmless celebrity reference. He was moving toward the most sensitive part of her public story, and he was about to challenge the meaning of power, pain, and royal rejection. His appearance had already drawn unusual attention. Entertainment reporters were listening for any reference to the monarchy, while those close to Meghan understood that one sharp line could ignite the controversy they had feared. Rock did not rush. He controlled the moment, speaking broadly about fame, silence, and public grievance until the audience began to recognize the story before he said Meghan's name. Then the fictionalized routine tightened. How, he asked in effect, could someone claim to have been silenced while speaking through global interviews, documentaries, podcasts, speeches, and public campaigns? The force did not come from a cruel accusation. It came from taking a complicated experience and crushing it into one blunt contradiction. At first, the audience hesitated. The subject carried too much pain, too much history, and too many unresolved arguments. But Rock shifted from royal authority to celebrity influence, suggesting that institutional power and public power were different. Yet neither could honestly be described as complete helplessness. The laughter grew. Once it began, it became harder to stop. Then Harry was pulled into the line of fire. The sharper fictionalized joke suggested that he had left royal duty only to spend years explaining royal duty to the world. That landed differently. It attacked not only his departure, but the purpose he had built around it. The audience laughed again, louder this time, because the joke made his freedom appear trapped inside the very institution he had rejected. Within minutes, short clips began circulating. Context disappeared. Pauses vanished. Only the harshest seconds remained, repeated until they sounded less like comedy and more like public judgment. Meghan's supporters accused Rock of reducing genuine suffering to entertainment. Critics called it a long overdue challenge to carefully managed messaging. Her advisors drafted possible responses, deleted them, and started again. Every sentence risked proving that the joke had struck deeper than they wanted anyone to know. Harry's reaction was more complicated than anger alone. He hated the simplification. Yet somewhere beneath that fury was recognition. He understood why the contradiction resonated, and that understanding made the moment even more painful. The palace remained officially silent, though private messages reportedly moved between courtiers who believed the routine marked a cultural shift. Then came the greater warning. Jimmy Carr had seen the reaction and was allegedly adjusting his own material. A source told Meghan's team that Carr would not repeat Rock's argument. He was preparing to target something far more dangerous, her continued connection to royal status. Chris Rock had challenged the story Meghan told about power, but Jimmy Carr was preparing to challenge something even more explosive, the possibility that she had never truly wanted to abandon the royal system, only to control her place within it. Jimmy Carr did not begin with the palace, the interviews, or the family feud. He began with a title. Then he paused, smiled, and asked why someone would reject an institution so publicly while protecting every symbol that kept her connected to it. The audience understood immediately. What followed was not a repeat of Chris Rock's argument. It was sharper, colder, and aimed directly at the contradiction Meghan feared most. Carr's fictionalized routine moved quickly through her departure from royal duty. The promise of independence, the commercial deals, the public complaints, and the continued value of royal identity. Each point tightened the same uncomfortable question: had Meghan escaped the monarchy? Or had she carried its most valuable symbols into a new marketplace? Then came the line that changed the room. Leaving the monarchy, Carr suggested, had somehow become Meghan and Harry's most profitable royal duty. The laughter arrived in waves, mixed with shock and visible discomfort. Some people laughed because the line felt brutally clever. Others reacted because it reduced years of pain, conflict, and sacrifice to a business strategy. Carr did not soften it. He pushed further. He contrasted Meghan's claims of exclusion with the global attention she received precisely because she had entered the royal family. Then Harry became the target. Carr portrayed him as a prince who escaped the institution but carried its identity into every interview, every project, and every attempt to begin again. Freedom, the joke implied, had never looked more royal. That was why the moment felt more destructive than either performance alone. Chris Rock had questioned the grievance narrative. Jimmy Carr attacked the independence narrative. One challenged the story of powerlessness. The other challenged the story of escape. Online, clips from both routines were cut together within hours. The edits made the performances appear coordinated, even though they had happened separately. Headlines began calling it a comedy double blow. The phrase spread because it was simple, dramatic, and impossible to ignore. Meghan's reaction went beyond anger. She feared the jokes had created a permanent shorthand for her entire public identity. Her team insisted the routines depended on simplification, but privately they understood the deeper danger. Simplification was exactly why comedy traveled so fast. Harry felt betrayed by the public's enthusiasm. To him, people were not only laughing at contradictions, they were laughing at pain, family rupture, and choices that had cost him almost everything. Critics answered that public figures could not demand cultural influence while also demanding protection from mockery. The palace said nothing. That silence allowed the moment to grow without royal fingerprints. Yet the possibility remained that senior figures felt privately vindicated because outsiders had said what the institution never could. Meghan finally made her decision. There would be no defensive statement, no direct reply. Instead, she would answer through a major public appearance designed to reclaim the story on her own terms. Yet Meghan's decision to respond without appearing to respond would carry its own danger, because every polished phrase, public smile, and carefully chosen message could now be measured against the jokes millions had already heard. Meghan's return to the spotlight appeared calm, confident, and perfectly controlled. She did not mention Chris Rock. She did not name Jimmy Carr, but every sentence sounded like an answer, and every smile carried the pressure of someone trying to defeat a joke without proving that it had wounded her. The appearance had been designed with extreme care. Its message was resilience, purpose, independence, and the future. Advisors removed anything that sounded defensive. They chose phrases that allowed Meghan to challenge the idea that her identity depended on royal conflict, without directly acknowledging the comedy storm surrounding her. Nothing could feel accidental. Not her tone, not her timing. not a single word. The pressure was brutal, because every detail now carried meaning. Visible anger could be treated as confirmation that the jokes had landed. Too much confidence could be called performance. Even restraint could be interpreted as calculation. Meghan was expected to look untouched while speaking beneath the weight of millions of reactions. She focused on her work, her family, and her creative ambitions. She spoke about building something lasting rather than answering every voice that tried to define her. Supporters rallied quickly, arguing that women in public life were often punished more severely for ambition, reinvention, and emotional honesty. To them, Meghan's composure was not proof of manipulation. It was survival. But critics moved just as fast. Clips from the appearance were placed beside the comedy routines, turning statements about independence into fresh setups for ridicule. Every attempt to escape the joke seemed to strengthen it. That was the trap. The more Meghan insisted she had moved beyond the monarchy, the more people asked why royal language still surrounded her story. Titles, palace memories, family fractures, and the meaning of departure remained present even when she tried to speak only about the future. Privately, the imbalance infuriated her. Years of fear, conflict, and personal experience had been reduced to seconds of comedy, while her response was examined word by word. Harry praised her strength in public, but his unease deepened. He remained convinced that silence from his family was not neutrality. To him, it felt like approval without responsibility. Rumors suggested palace figures had watched closely, listening for any phrase that might reopen arguments about titles, protocol, or private agreements. Meghan considered launching a new project immediately, hoping momentum could bury the controversy beneath achievement. Her advisors split again. Some called it confidence. Others feared it would look reactive. Then, Jimmy Carr was asked about the uproar and reportedly offered no apology. His brief reply pushed the story back into circulation. Chris Rock appeared equally unmoved, treating influential public figures as legitimate subjects of commentary. The final blow came away from the headlines. Meghan learned that potential partners were raising concerns about controversy, audience division, and reputational risk. The jokes had crossed into negotiations. The laughter was no longer confined to a stage or a viral clip. It had entered boardrooms, private calls, and negotiations, forcing Meghan and Harry to confront the true price of becoming a global brand built around a royal wound. The palace issued no statement, offered no defense, and showed no public reaction. Yet behind closed doors, the comedy storm was being studied with unusual interest. Some saw cruelty. Others saw consequence. And one senior figure allegedly described the moment as a lesson Harry had been warned about years earlier. Royal silence had always carried more than one meaning. It could shield the institution from scandal, but it could also leave an outsider exposed. While headlines multiplied and clips continued spreading, palace aides reportedly monitored every shift in public reaction. Journalists asked whether the family felt sympathy, concern, or satisfaction. The answer remained the same: no comment. For some inside royal circles, that silence may have felt like justice. Meghan and Harry had repeatedly spoken about an institution that could rarely answer without appearing defensive or vindictive. Now comedians were expressing criticisms the palace would never dare place in an official statement. No order had to be given. No campaign had to be organized. The monarchy simply had to remain still. Behind that calculation stood an old royal principle. Public relevance brought extraordinary privilege, but it also removed control. Once a person became part of national conversation, admiration could turn into suspicion, and sympathy could become ridicule. Senior courtiers allegedly saw the routines as evidence that the Sussexes' cultural position had shifted. What had once been driven by fascination and compassion was now being met with open skepticism. Not everyone welcomed that change. A more compassionate voice reportedly warned that humiliation would not repair the family. It could push Harry deeper into isolation, making reconciliation even less likely. But the palace drew a careful distinction between press intrusion and public satire. One could be condemned as harassment. The other could be defended as commentary. Harry saw that distinction as convenient. Relatives who had once spoken against media cruelty now appeared unwilling to defend Meghan when comedy became equally personal. His anger grew because silence seemed to protect everyone except the woman beside him. Royal history offered a colder explanation. Scandal became truly dangerous when it stopped being debated and started being mocked. Anger could be challenged with statements, interviews, or evidence. Laughter was harder to fight. It spread without asking audiences to agree on every detail. Meghan suspected palace-linked figures were quietly encouraging stories about the routine's impact. Harry considered contacting his father or another senior royal, then stopped. Any private appeal could leak, turning his vulnerability into another headline. One rumored palace observation cut deeper than the jokes themselves. Meghan's mistake had been believing visibility could be separated from judgment. That idea reopened an older disagreement between her and Harry. She wanted a future no longer shaped by royal grievance. He still believed the past demanded an answer. Finally, Harry asked the question neither could avoid: if they stopped speaking about the institution that had shaped their lives, what remained of their shared mission? That question would force the couple toward their most painful confrontation yet. Because the comedy had exposed more than a branding problem, it had revealed a growing difference between Meghan's need to move forward and Harry's inability to leave the past behind. When the headlines began to fade, the damage remained. Meghan wanted to prove that one brutal comedy moment could not define her future. Harry wanted accountability from a world he believed had turned pain into entertainment. Between them stood the monarchy, silent, distant, and still shaping everything. The viral cycle slowed, but the jokes did not disappear. They remained in clips, headlines, private conversations, and public memory. For Meghan, the danger was no longer the laughter itself. It was the possibility that a few minutes of comedy had created a permanent explanation for everything she had tried to become. She wanted a clean break from reaction-based publicity. Future projects, she argued, had to succeed without palace conflict, royal revelations, or another defense of the past. She could not spend the rest of her public life answering every voice that mocked her. Strategic silence, in her mind, was no longer weakness. It was discipline. Harry saw it differently. To him, silence looked too much like surrender. The comedy storm was not an isolated embarrassment, but part of a larger pattern: humiliation, abandonment, and the repeated transformation of personal pain into entertainment. He believed defending Meghan was an act of loyalty, yet every defense risked keeping the attack alive. That tension exposed the distance growing between them. Meghan wanted to escape the cycle. Harry still wanted the world to admit what had been done. The routines had already changed the public conversation. Complicated arguments about race, class, privilege, family, power, and media cruelty had been compressed into punchlines anyone could repeat. Supporters continued to see Meghan as a woman punished for challenging tradition. Critics saw the jokes as proof that contradictions had finally become impossible to ignore. The monarchy emerged as the indirect winner. It had survived another crisis without speaking, apologizing, or accepting responsibility. While Meghan and Harry were forced to react, the palace remained distant and untouched. That imbalance was perhaps the cruelest part. Meghan and Harry had spent years constructing their narrative through interviews, projects, speeches, and deeply personal disclosures. Rock and Jimmy Carr needed only minutes to reshape it. Still, Meghan refused to let the moment become her ending. She began planning another reinvention, one built around work rather than opposition to the crown. But Harry remained tied to unfinished battles over family, memory, inheritance, protection, and betrayal. The comedians had not destroyed Meghan's career or silenced her voice. They had attacked something more fragile: the connection between her public identity and the audience's willingness to believe it. Whether the storm would become temporary humiliation or a permanent turning point remained unclear. Meghan's next move could prove the comedians wrong, or confirm the very contradiction they had exposed. She had escaped the palace. Harry had escaped royal duty. But neither had escaped the story that followed them beyond its walls. Because the laughter may have ended inside the room, but beyond the stage, a far more dangerous performance was only beginning the battle to decide who would control the final version of Meghan and Harry's royal story.